It was a wild day on Wall Street. The Dow crossed the 26,000 mark for the first time, but it gave up the gains, ending slightly lower at the end of the day. Art Hogan, chief market strategist at B. Riley FBR, joins us now. And I want to get to the market, but real quick, what do you make of that last story that Lauren mentioned about those tech executives heading to D.C.? Do you think that Washington is getting too entrenched in business, Art?
No, I don't think so. I think it's important to make sure that these large platforms that are increasingly a bigger part of everybody's lives are doing a good job of making sure they know who's on and what kind of content they're producing. So you're bumping up against First Amendment rights, obviously, and whether or not these folks are publishing. But just know it's a big part of all of our lives now. So we have to make sure whether it's affecting elections or having an effect on terrorism. I think it's long overdue, and I think it's probably a really good idea.
Well, and the FANG stocks, if you will, have been on fire. So certainly there's an appetite for that from the consumer and the market. Let's talk about Dow 26K. We didn't hit it yesterday. Is this buyer fatigue?
Yeah, it really ran out of gas right after the open. You saw that, immediately after the open, you noticed that the transports were lower on the day significantly. The Russell 2000 hadn't participated, and then the S&P 500 started giving up its gains, and it just took Boeing to roll over, and Boeing and two other Dow components really were driving about half of the gains yesterday. So this is a market that's been unidirectionally higher for the entirety of this year. So for it to take a pause and have a reversal like that, as shocking as that feels, was probably a healthy thing. And that's kind of volatility we're just not used to. We've only seen 8 1% moves over the course of most of 2017. So for 2018 to throw it in this early, I think it's a sign of things to come.
We're going to get more financial names today. Of course, it's a big week for the banks when it comes to earnings. Also, we're getting all these reports on the fourth quarter about the effect of the corporate tax rate on companies. How are you choosing to analyze the data you're getting from companies on Q4?
Well, on balance, the Q4 earnings are going to be very much like the last 3 quarters, where we're going to see low double-digit earnings growth on high single-digit revenue growth, and that's terrific. But this is probably the most key of the earnings reporting season, because this is the first time we get to hear from corporate America how they're adjusting their earnings estimates for 2018 with the lower corporate tax rate. So companies like Goldman Sachs and Bank of America that will report today will talk about that one-off hit that they have to take with trapped cash repatriation cost. But going forward, how much of that tax cut is actually going to drop to the bottom line? So when you think about some of the financials, that's huge. They're very high effective taxpayers, and I think that the guidance for 18 is still, in terms of consensus, is still too low.
Okay, that's interesting that you say that. Certainly those numbers are playing out. And, of course, now it's about reading the reports. They've never been more interesting, probably, as far as the quarterly reports. Real quick, I got to ask you about Bitcoin. New reports about North Korea targeting cryptocurrencies, trying to steal cryptocurrencies, targeting those investors because they need funding. They've got sanctions levied against them right now. Does that make you nervous? I don't know if you support Bitcoin or not, but it's certainly something that everybody is talking about right now.
Well, even the most ardent of the cryptocurrency supporters will tell you that the one thing that stands in the way of this moving forward is regulation. So when you talk about countries getting involved, governments getting involved, obviously that's what we've seen the effect on that. It's basically cut in half from its peak. So yeah, it's regulation, and it's all about regulation. The more we hear about that, the tougher the sled this is going to be for them.
It's really interesting. Art Hogan, thanks, Art.
Thank you.
Tensions have increased and tensions have eased, but the trains and trucks have continued to roll. At the Friendship Bridge in Dandong, some of the essential food and supplies that keeps North Korea going arrives from China. 90% of North Korea's trade is with China. While Chinese leaders say they fully implement UN sanctions, they seem equally determined not to allow North Korea to collapse.
The hope is that over time, North Korea might be able to adapt while still manage to survive. So China won't take abrupt measures to completely cut off North Korea.
Despite sanctions, there's evidence that some North Korean businesses, such as restaurants and hotels, that should have been closed, have stayed open. From China's perspective, now is not the time for tougher measures. With the resumption of talks between North and South Korea, Beijing wants to encourage the signs of a thaw.
North Korea and South Korea have started talking. The Olympics will be held at the start of next month. I'm not sure China has the political motivation to impose further severe sanctions.
The fear for China is that just as there's a hint of an improvement in relations with North Korea, the US and its allies are preparing to ratchet up the pressure, and that will only harden Pyongyang's position. The North Korean leadership say nuclear missiles capable of hitting the US are needed for survival against hostile powers. More threats from the US and its allies might give leader Kim Jong-un the justification to speed up the weapons program, not slow it down. Rob McBride, Al Jazeera, Beijing.
It was a year that saw the leaders of the United States and North Korea exchanging threats of nuclear war and some rather undignified insults. Donald Trump called the North Korean leader Little Rocket Man. Kim Jong-un dubbed the U.S. president a mentally deranged dotard. They boasted about their nuclear buttons.
The U.S. mainland is within the range of our nuclear strike, and the nuclear button is put on the desk in my office at all times.
And sparked fears the Korean peninsula could be edging closer to war.
They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
It certainly has elevated the level of tension on the peninsula. President Trump has made this issue his most important foreign policy issue, so it has brought a lot of attention globally.
During Trump's first year in office, North Korea launched its first successful tests of intercontinental ballistic missiles, demonstrating that its weapons could reach the United States. It conducted its biggest ever nuclear bomb test and late last year declared its weapons development program was complete. In response, the U.S. successfully pushed for tough UN sanctions, including a cap on North Korea's petrol supplies.
Other countries in this region have been faced with a delicate balancing act. China supported the UN sanctions but was unwilling to cut off North Korea's oil supply completely. And South Korea has been pushing a dual campaign of pressuring the North while continuing to promote dialogue.
With the new year came a shift. For the first time in more than 2 years, the two Koreas sat down for official talks and agreed North Korea would attend the Winter Olympics next month.
The South Korean government is now engaging with the North Korean government in dialogues, and the North Korean delegation visiting South Korea in February. So we're in a very different place than what people thought even 2, 3, 6 months ago.
So what happens next? South Korean President Moon Jae-in thanked Donald Trump for helping bring about the talks, and both say they would be willing to sit down with Kim Jong-un under the right circumstances, though Trump has previously said any talks with North Korea would be a waste of time. Mixed signals from his administration, and even the fact that a year on he hasn't appointed an ambassador to South Korea, has some analysts questioning what Trump's policy on North Korea really is. Kathy Novak, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
Breaking this morning, another false alert about a nuclear attack. This time, not in Hawaii, but in Japan. And that country's national broadcaster is apologizing on air. John Northcott has the details this morning. John.
Yes, Heather. NHK at various times has to warn people about a possible nuclear test because we've seen the North Koreans fly missiles over Japanese airspace. They also warn about volcanoes, tsunami, typhoons, and earthquakes. Let's have a look at the warning that went out to those who have the NHK mobile phone app, warning them that there was a nuclear launch attack had taken place. So we'll give you the translation as well, just to give you an idea of the wording of it all that went out. We should point out it went out and was quickly retracted. It wasn't the case that we saw in Hawaii, where it lasted for some 38 minutes before there was a correction sent out. Here it is here. North Korea appears to have launched a missile. The government urges people to take shelter inside buildings or underground. So very rapidly, within a matter of moments, we understand, they quickly came out and said, sorry, mistake. sorry about that, won't happen again, and that was essentially how they did it. A J Alert is a system that they have, and a system that is tested. In fact, just the other day in Fukuoka in the country, a major municipal and urban area, they conducted a full-on test where they actually sent out an alert like that. People sheltered in place as if there was an actual nuclear attack had taken place. So it is very much on the minds of the Japanese. We saw, of course, on Saturday, the situation in Hawaii, a place not unfamiliar, at least in its history, with attacks, and we saw the 38-minute delay in the correction of that. We understand they have instituted policies now. There won't be one person in charge of sending out the alert, and they are reviewing the entire process. Heather?
People in closets, people with children in the sewers. I mean, it was 38 minutes of terror, John, that certainly nobody wants to live through. So you have been looking into the whole question of whether we could ever see something similar, a false alarm, here in our country.
Well, of course, we have alert systems in this country. You have a variety of them. For example, you think of Amber Alerts. There are warnings that could take place. The folks at the Weather Network, in fact, are involved in this in terms of taking warnings from various levels of government, processing them, and then distributing out to broadcasters to send out there. One gentleman from the Weather Network describes how it works. Have a listen.
There's steps to make sure that they validate and confirm that this is indeed the alert they want to send out. The alert issuer can also add some content or text with that canceled message that can provide further clarifications.
So that is the process we have in this country. It's not the fact of one person just pressing a button. There are several people involved in that, and then there is a chance to quickly clarify. And in fact, countries that do have civil warning systems, many, if not most, do around the world. And this is why the Hawaii situation is so remarkable in that it was able to, for well over half an hour, sit out there, people panicking without it being corrected. Most countries have systems in place that they can turn it around a little faster than they did in Hawaii.
Making sure they know who's on and what kind of content they're producing. So, you know, you're bumping up against First Amendment rights, obviously, and whether or not these folks are publishing. But, you know, just know it's a big part of all of our lives now. So we have to make sure whether it's affecting elections or having an effect on terrorism. I think it's long overdue, and I think it's probably a really good idea.
Well, and the thanks. You know, it was a wild day on Wall Street. The Dow crossed the 26,000 mark for the first time, but it gave up the gains, ending slightly lower at the end of the day. Art Hogan, chief market.
And it just took Boeing to roll over, and Boeing and two other Dow components really were driving about half of the gains yesterday. So this is a market that's been unidirectionally higher for the entirety of this year. So for it to take a pause and have a reversal like that, as shocking as that feels, was probably a healthy thing. And that's kind of volatility we're just not used to. We've only seen 8 1% moves over the course of most of two.
Market strategist at B. Riley FBR joins us now. And I want to get to the market, but real quick, what do you make of that last story that Lauren mentioned about those tech executives heading to D.C.? Do you think that Washington is getting too entrenched in business, Art?
No, I don't think so. I think it's it's important to make sure that these large platforms that are increasingly a bigger part of everybody's lives are doing a good job of.
Stocks, if you will, have been on fire. So certainly there's an appetite for that from the consumer and the market. Let's talk about Dow 26K. We didn't hit it yesterday. Is this buyer fatigue?
Yeah, it really ran out of gas right after the open. You saw that, immediately after the open, you noticed that the transports were lower on the day significantly. The Russell 2000 hadn't participated, and then the S&P 500 started giving up its gains.